So I can't really tell if it's romantic or not that my boyfriend put me up as the prize to a race without me knowing. To give some backstory, we were dating on and off for about 1.5 years, and we'll just go ahead and call this man Brad. We met in health class, and he was kind of an a-hole, but I honestly fell so hard for him. Well, around this time, he sold his old car and got a beautiful 2015 black Charger. And let me tell y'all, I would feel like such a baddie when he'd come pick me up. And when I moved an hour away, he would still come pick me up weekly and take me to nice hotels. Well, one day he was talking to me about how obsessed his friends are with me, which I thought was so strange, but he was like, yeah, I showed them your picture. They all think you are so fine. And I guess they all talked about how they wish they could have a chance with someone like me and blah, blah, blah. And that's when he decided to enter his fancy little car into a race. He asked me if I wanted to come see him perform, but we were in the dead of winter, so I was like, probably not. That's when he started begging me and told me that the prize was really important. So I decided to go. Follow my Insta. Storytime part 2 to my boyfriend putting me up as the prize for a race without me knowing. So when I showed up, I had a feeling that the prize was pretty important. So when I finally saw him, I was like, hey, so what exactly is the prize? And he gave me the weirdest look and he was like, babe, you know how all my friends think you're hot, right? I was like, I mean, sure. And he goes, well, I told them whoever wins gets to be your boyfriend. So I was like, WTF, Brad? Why would you do that? And he just looks at me and goes, don't worry, I'll win. And I was like, well, you better. So I literally stood out there in the cold watching a race that I could barely see. There was someone really tall in front of me. My heart almost dropped several times because I kept hearing Brad is gonna lose. And then I pushed the guy in front of me out of the way and saw Brad cross the finish line. One of his friends actually came up to us after the race and claimed that Brad cheated to win. He was probably just a sore loser, but we celebrated the rest of the night. If you guys have a story you'd like to share, follow me and DM me on Instagram.
Story time of how I was almost abducted and caught by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I decided to visit my grandfather's grave because it was his birthday. His passing was really hard for me to deal with because he had just died the previous year in March and the wounds were still pretty fresh. It was daytime and I was kneeling in front of his grave with my head down. I was mourning and crying as I thought of our memories together. However, something didn't feel right. For some reason, a sense of urgency filled my stomach. I could somehow tell something bad was about to happen, but I didn't know what. The area around the cemetery was covered in woods. In that moment, I looked up to see a man full-on sprinting from the woods in my direction. Although I was in shock, I forced myself to get up and run as fast as possible towards my truck. By the time I made it to my truck, he had gotten about 50 feet from me. I jumped in and locked the doors instantly. That's when he stopped and threw his hands up in the air in a huff like his favorite team had just lost a football game. I started my truck and slammed my foot on the gas pedal, driving right past him. Our eyes were locked and neither of us broke eye contact for a second. I got a really good look at his face. At first, I thought I was your average weirdo, but little did I know I was looking into the face of one of the most notorious serial killers. Part 2 how I was almost abducted and caught by a serial killer. A few years after this incident, I was at work, bored out of my mind, and decided to download an app. This app had a ton of paranormal, cryptid, serial killer, and UFO articles. As I was browsing through the serial killer articles, I came across one that made my heart drop into my ass. Israel Keyes. He was widely known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her body, and dumping the pieces into a frozen lake. He would travel across the US burying kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. After he murdered Samantha Koenig in Alaska, he traveled to Texas for a wedding in a city not too far from where I live and disappeared for a bit. Not even his own family knew where he was. He was arrested in Lufkin and brought to a city 1 over from me before he was extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. A year ago, I found a book on him and read about his crimes. At the end of the book, he described some of his favorite places to abduct people were public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there's a kill kit buried in the woods of the cemetery that he tried to abduct me in. You were fast, Israel, but I think that my grandfather was watching out for me that day because I was faster.
I got pulled over today, and the cop comes to my window and goes, license, registration, and proof of insurance. And I look at him, I say, officer, I don't have my license on me, I don't have my registration, I don't have any proof of insurance. So then the cop looks at me and goes, then why the hell were you speeding? I caught you going 90 and a 65. And I look at him and I say, officer, the reason I was speeding was because I just killed my girlfriend. I chopped her up and I put her in my trunk. So the cop backs off my window, says, listen, boy, wait right here. And he calls every cop in the area to come look at my car. So my car is now surrounded by cops, and the chief of police does a whole check. He checks my trunk, and all he finds is a backpack. So then he comes to my window. So the chief of police comes up to my window and says, listen, the officer who pulled you over said you had no driver's license, no proof of insurance, no registration, and that you just chopped up your girlfriend and put her in the trunk. But when I looked in the trunk, all I found was a backpack. I found nothing. And I look at the chief of police and I say, yeah, I know. This lying son of a bitch probably told you I'm speeding too, right?
Have you ever had 17 girlfriends, 2 fiancés, 1 wife, and 4 kids? Yeah, me neither, but Jason freaking Collier did. So let's get into this case. So Jason Collier, who was the chief of police in a small town in Texas, ended up matching with a girl on a dating site. Her name was Cecily, and they hit it off really well. She was a mom, she was divorced, and he presented himself as a really good, godly man that was gonna take over. He offered to take care of everything, pay for everything, and then eventually proposed over the phone a couple months later. She accepted, and from then on out, he was referring to her as Mrs. Collier. Cecily got a little bit suspicious that he might be using her, so she went to go do some investigating herself. And on the police website, it listed him as being married and having kids. So she was like, okay, something doesn't add up. She confronted him and essentially was like, hey, what's this about? He was like, oh my God, no, I'm divorced. Like, we're getting married, baby. I love you. And he even gave her the annulment papers as proof, but they were all forged. So Cecily immediately took to Facebook. And that's when other girls started to come forward. And man, was a timeline created. Like for part 2. Okay, part 2 with the Jason Collier case, because this ish is crazy. So this man was literally juggling every single relationship possible that you could have. Like, save some women for the rest of us, Mr. 17 girlfriends, 2 fiancés, 1 wife. Anyway, so the first person to reach out because of the Facebook post was a girl named Christy. Christy saw it and she was like, oh my God, that's my man. Not only had they been dating, but he had also proposed to her and they were also planning a wedding. He was literally syncing up so many of the stuff that he said to these 2 girls. He literally bought one a coffee maker and then talked to the other one about buying her a coffee maker. And while he picked out one of the girls' rings, he was texting the other girl about picking her out a ring. While he was off with the other one, he would always send little video updates. And one of them was even about how he was helping out when the Capitol storming happened, even though he was just with one of his girlfriends. And as you guys should know, this is entirely illegal. So he obviously had to resign from the police force and then he was arrested later that day. The charge was for tampering with a government document with the intent to harm. And when I say a whole binder of women came forward with screenshots, but at least he gifted them all coffee makers. Follow me on Instagram for more content.
I was in class on Zoom. I wanted to go to sleep, honestly, because like when I'm tired, I go to sleep. I end up falling asleep and then class ends and everyone starts leaving the class except me, because I was like in a whole other universe at this point. I was dreaming, I was flying. At this point, me and the teacher are alone in the call. This is the best part. Then the teacher starts talking to me and he's like, Samantha, wake up. Samantha, please. Samantha, you have another class. He woke me up, but I was half awake, so I didn't really know what was going on. So I thought it was my brother waking me up, and I straight up yelled. I was like, shut up, you fat booger. And so then I realized, oh shit, I just called my teacher a fat booger. And now he scheduled a parent conference. I'm going on Monday, so I'm really excited.
This is why you should think twice about making your friend your surrogate. I always knew I wanted to have a few kids. I've dreamt of being a mom for as long as I can remember. However, due to a medical condition, carrying a baby isn't an option for me. I wasn't going to let this stop me, so I started looking into surrogacy. This process was really expensive and a lot harder than I thought. After months of searching, my best friend Ashley volunteered to be my surrogate for me and my fiance. She knew how much we wanted to start a family. I was so excited and extremely grateful. Ashley and I had been friends for 8 years and I couldn't think of anyone better to be our surrogate. My fiance and I decided to ask Ashley to move in with us so that we could all be there for each other throughout the pregnancy. Everything was going great until it wasn't. Ashley started making a few comments to my fiance that made me really uncomfortable. One night, she asked him to give her a back massage. When he hesitated, she said to him, "I'm carrying your child, you should do whatever I ask you to." I let this comment go even though it didn't sit right with me. Another night, she referred to herself as his baby mama, which made me furious. I told her she was overstepping and she laughed and told me she was just kidding. It only got worse from here. Part 2, why you should think twice about making your friend your surrogate. Ashley continued to overstep throughout the surrogacy process. One night, she told me she didn't like the name that I picked out for my baby and started giving me recommendations on what she thought the name should be. As it got closer to the due date, Ashley told me that she had thoughts about moving in permanently and raising the baby with my fiance and I, which was never part of the plan. When I shut that down, she seemed bitter. I could tell she had developed feelings for my fiance, which made it even more awkward. I knew I made a terrible mistake picking her as my surrogate. After my daughter was born, Ashley stayed with us for a little while longer, even though it wasn't part of our initial agreement. She wanted to spend every second holding our new baby girl, and I could tell that she was getting overly attached. We decided to tell Ashley our observations and told her that she had to move out before things got worse. She didn't take this well, and when she left, she told us that she didn't want to hear from us anymore. A couple years later, Ashley reached out to us and asked if she could come over and see us. When she came over, she told my daughter right in front of me that she was her real mom and that she'd find out when she was older. I couldn't believe it and immediately asked her to leave. Luckily, I haven't heard from her since.
So put a finger down if half of your biological family is now behind bars for plotting your murder. So when I was 14, I made the realization that I was pansexual. I at the time did not know my own family's feelings about sexuality. So I decided to come out to them, but nothing could have prepared me for the extreme homophobic reaction that was in store. I just want to put a massive trigger warning over the rest of this story. After coming out to them, I literally remember nothing. I woke up completely foggy and out of it in a hospital. I was then let know by the doctors that I had a major head concussion and possible amnesia. Obviously, I was entirely confused and had no idea what happened. So that's when I was let know that all 3 of my parents, I have a stepdad as well, were in custody. They were being charged with abuse and assault. And then 2 of my aunts were also taken in for tampering with a crime scene. And literally the only reason that I was even found was because the neighbors heard me scream and called the cops. And now I was a ward of the state and had foster parents. Once the trial started, that's when all the crazy details about the crime came to light. Follow me on Insta for part 2. Storytime part 2 to my biological family plotting my murder. So this is where the trial began. Thankfully, my neighbors not only heard me, but they also watched some of the events occur through the back door. They watched my family remove a glass gun cabinet, which apparently my head went through. They assumed that I was going to die, so my aunts came over and started to scrub the entire place with bleach. And when asked why exactly this incident happened, my stepfather with no hesitation stated, because that no good for anything piece of ish thinks she has a choice over who she sleeps with. My aunts were sentenced 15 to 20 years and had to pay up to 10 grand in fines. Both my stepfather and my biological father got life in prison, and my mom got 60 to life for her assistance in the whole thing. She also didn't notify the authorities and failed to appear for her first trial. After the trial was over, I ended up getting adopted by 2 amazing men who live in Russia, which is my home country. They later adopted my siblings, and I'm now 24 with an amazing career and family. And even though I've changed my entire name, my biological family still tries to reach out. If you have a story time you'd like to share, DM